Hello, friends, and let's get started.
Sarah woke up on a Saturday afternoon feeling a little anxious. She had to attend the annual corporate party, which this year was going to be really lavish. The company had decided to celebrate its next anniversary in a big way and had rented a huge country mansion. Every employee, from interns to top managers, had been invited along with their spouses or plus one, but her husband, Jason, couldn't go because of his workload. Although he usually tried to accompany Sarah to all events that were important to her, this time there was an emergency and it was impossible to reschedule. Sometimes it seemed to Sarah that he was glad not to go. The last couple of years their marriage had become like a quiet partnership without passion or adventure. So a corporate party full of strangers was hardly appealing to Jason. Tonight's party promised to be the talk of the town for 2 weeks. A swanky mansion with its own grounds, pool, reception halls, live music, unlimited cocktails, and that was just the tip of the iceberg. In addition, there were rumors that there would be a new investor in the company, one Adam Hall, about whom few people knew anything, but everyone was intrigued. Sarah saw it more as just another innovation, as the management had long wanted to expand the business and find a powerful financial partner. When she woke up, Jason was already gone, leaving her a note on the kitchen table. "Sorry, I can't go. Good luck at the corporate event. Love, Jay." It was a familiar, almost mechanical sign of attention, written in neat, even handwriting. Sarah felt a little sad, but she quickly pushed the feeling away, thinking habitually, "I'll relax tonight, have a couple of cocktails, and look at all those colleagues dressed up in festive outfits." Then she went to the bathroom. Perfect shower, styling, makeup, and was soon ready to go. The drive to the country mansion took a little over an hour. When her car pulled up to the high gate, she marveled at the long string of cars left along the driveway. Clearly the party was in full swing, even though the official start wasn't scheduled until noon. Smiling, Sarah parked and walked to the entrance, where she was already being greeted by her colleagues from the marketing department and waiters with trays full of champagne glasses and fruit canapes. Sarah looked around. The luxury was overwhelming. She had never been to such a lavish corporate party before. As she looked around at the guests, she noticed the many shiny women's outfits. Girls in long evening gowns, some in short cocktail dresses, some in open-shouldered pantsuits. Men mostly preferred classic suits without ties or a looser dress code. The atmosphere was clearly conducive to fun. People were laughing, getting acquainted, discussing the future of the company. Suddenly Sarah was called. "Sarah." "Hi." It was her friend from work, Marie. "Listen, it's crazy beautiful here, isn't it?" Sarah smiled, exchanged a few jokes with her. Marie winked conspiratorially. "Have you seen him?" she asked, trying to keep her voice down. "Him who?" "The new investor, Adam Hall. He's around here somewhere. They say he's very charismatic and, well, you know." Sarah shrugged and, taking a small sip of her cocktail, looked around. No, she didn't see anyone in the audience that particularly stood out. But the feeling that someone was watching her intently came almost immediately. It was hardly spontaneous. At the far end of the hall stood a tall man in an expensive suit, white shirt without a tie, collar slightly open. Tan face, light stubble, dark, confident eyes. He was actually looking directly at Sarah, not shying away from openly studying her figure. Sarah felt a strange twinge in her chest. Perhaps it was just the effect of the cocktail, she decided, and turned away, trying to keep her expression neutral. But the thought of being stared at made her inwardly agitated. The music changed slightly, more lively rhythms were playing, and many of the guests took to the makeshift dance floor that was located in the center of the large room. Sarah thought that maybe she should join the dancers. After all, when else would she get a chance to dance in such a swanky place? She took a couple sips of the cocktail and felt a slight warmth spreading through her body. She felt good, relaxed, and maybe a little hungry for something unpredictable. After all, for years she'd lived according to a set routine. Home, work, occasional outings with her friends, and then it was back to the circle. Then someone appeared next to her, reached out his hand to the glass of champagne on the tray, and said softly, "Beautiful evening, isn't it?" Sarah turned around. It was the same man. He was smiling a little mockingly, but there was confidence in his gaze, even a slight challenge. Yes, gorgeous, she replied briefly, a little confused. I apologize if I seem intrusive. I hardly know anyone here, except a few executives. I was hoping that one of the staff would be so kind as to keep me company. Are you Adam Hall? Sarah suddenly blurted out, feeling like she wanted to be sure. Adam, he confirmed, grinning. So everyone knows me by now? Not good. I like to study a situation myself first before it studies me. But apparently word travels faster than I show up in the hall. Sarah almost choked with laughter. He spoke floridly, as if reading a speech somewhere at a private party of politicians. But there was something magnetic about the man's appearance. His self-confidence was evident in everything. In his straight posture, in the tone of his voice, in his calm but tenacious movements. And you, then, are one of the leading project specialists? He continued. I believe your name is Sarah? She nodded, trying to figure out how he knew her name, but remembered that he might have been studying the profiles of the top employees, or someone had already managed to enlighten him. Either way, Adam didn't take his eyes off her, and Sarah became unusually excited. Sometimes, in rare moments, she wished someone would approach her like this, in the midst of luxury, and awaken the adventurous nature she so carefully hid behind a mask of propriety. And, judging by how quickly she had become dizzy, that someone had appeared. But she wasn't even thinking about seriously crossing the line. Just allowing herself a little flirtation at the holiday party, nothing more. Why don't you have some champagne with me? Adam asked, raising his glass. After all, that's what events like this are for people to get to know each other, socialize, and relax. Sarah felt something forbidden stirring inside her. Relax, it repeated in her mind. Was that word so harmless in the mouth of such a man? She took a sip of her cocktail, hesitating slightly, and nodded. Why not? It's a celebration. Soon she was with a new glass in her hand, and there was a sense of lightness in her head, with an undercurrent of excitement. She tried to keep her distance, but she caught Adam's every phrase. He talked about the company, about how he was looking for promising projects to invest in, how he valued honesty and directness in business. But all this sounded to Sarah not like a business conversation, but like a sly way of letting her know, I'm a steady hand, you can't lose with me, I get my way. At one point, their conversation was interrupted by a colleague in the legal department who decided to draw Adam's attention to herself, and Sarah felt relieved for a moment. But then a strange jealousy echoed inside her. After all, a few seconds ago, Adam had been looking at her as if he'd only seen her alone in this crowded room. Soon more rhythmic music began to play, and the dancing began. Cocktails were stirring the blood. Sarah decided that one dance certainly couldn't hurt. She stepped out onto the makeshift dance floor with Marie and a few other female employees, letting herself be moved to the beat of the music. A few minutes later, she saw Adam approach her. He didn't say a word, just held out his hand. It was a silent challenge. As she danced, she felt his presence behind her, his hot breath on the back of her neck. And at one point, she allowed herself a little more than she should have. She pressed herself slightly against him, as if it were a matter of habit to dance with a strange man at a party. An outsider's view would have been unequivocal. There was more than a little flirting going on here. And somewhere nearby, someone was taking a video on their phone. It's silly fun to post crazy dancing in the corporate chat room to show how employees can have fun. It hadn't occurred to any of the dancers that it could become anything more than a harmless memory of a fun night out. Sarah let Adam's arm slide around her waist, barely resisting when he pulled her a little closer to him than was appropriate for coworkers. The air smelled of perfume, alcohol, the clean forest air that wafted through the mansion's open doors, and something else, a foreboding sense of danger. But that danger was intoxicating, tantalizing, something inside her whispering, let yourself have a little freedom. You're so tired of routine, aren't you? The dance lasted no more than 5 minutes, but to Sarah it seemed like an eternity, filled with adrenaline rushes. When the music changed to a slower one, she had time to regain her senses and pulled away and said quickly, I need a breath of air, and headed for the exit of the hall. Adam remained where he was, his gaze burning into her back, and she felt it physically. She felt it and knew that if she refused to continue now, she could go back to her normal, measured life. If she agreed to continue the conversation, her evening, and maybe her whole life, would take a new trajectory. The evening went on, as usual. The waiters replaced the appetizers. The music changed from energetic rhythms to smooth overdubs. Sarah, feeling an unusual excitement in herself, decided to pause and went out onto the terrace of the mansion. The sun was beginning to set. Orange and pink reflections played on the trees in the distance. It was like being in an oil painting, all beautiful, lush, unreal. "Do you like the view?" a familiar voice suddenly asked. She turned around. Adam was standing behind her, holding 2 glasses of sparkling wine. His eyes still glowed with the same confidence with which he had looked at her in the hall. Sarah felt her heart beating harder. "It's amazing here," she said after a short pause. "And I should probably say now that it's time for me to go back to the hall or find my co-workers." "But you don't." "Yes," she admitted. "I don't say." Adam stepped closer, handed her 1 glass, and raised his own in a gesture of toast to unexpected twists and turns. She nodded, chugged it lightly, and took a sip. The wine was cool, with a pleasantly sour flavor. It was soothing and at the same time fueled her inner fire. Sarah realized that this seemed to be her 3rd or 4th glass of wine of the evening, a considerable dose for someone who didn't normally abuse alcohol. But now she wanted to forget about any inhibitions, about the limits of propriety. Perhaps it was the combination of luxury, music, the beauty of a country sunset, and the attentive gaze of a man who knew how to use his charm. "I've been watching you today," Adam said, leaning toward her. "And I've noticed that it's as if you're not fully with us here. It's as if your gaze is directed inward toward yourself." "Perhaps," Sarah smiled. "I'm often out there in my thoughts. I guess that's how I rest." "What do you rest from?" "Routine. From the monotony that had begun to seep into every aspect of my life." Adam listened attentively, and Sarah was unaccustomed to a stranger trying so subtly to understand her condition. She felt a frankness bursting out, though not long ago it would not have occurred to her to share her innermost feelings with a stranger. "From the man you live with?" he said suddenly. Sarah felt her insides tense. The mention of her husband automatically triggered a warning signal in her head. "Careful, you're dangerously close to something you might regret." But she only waved her hands. "My husband is a good man. We've been together for years. It's just, there are times when feelings transform into something calmer. Not that I'm unhappy, but not that I'm happy either." Silence hung between them. Sarah looked away, staring at the sunset. Her heart was racing. She was suddenly frightened by how easily Adam, barely recognizing her, had managed to lead her into thoughts she'd been running from for months, maybe years. She really wasn't completely happy. "Would you like to dance?" he suddenly suggested, returning to the subject of dancing again. "Here? On the terrace?" "Of course here. It's prettier here." He didn't wait for an answer. He simply moved closer, touching her waist, and began to move softly, without music, to the rhythm of some inaudible waltz. Sarah felt his warmth, and a firework of emotions erupted inside her. She let him lead, trying not to think about how it looked from the outside. Maybe no one was watching because the terrace was empty. As time passed, the movements became more sensual, and he pulled her closer to him. Sarah could only hear her rapid breathing and his calm but inviting presence. She smelled his perfume, which had woody and citrus notes. She felt like she was about to lose touch with reality. "Why are you letting me do all this?" Adam asked when their faces were so close she could see every glint in his eyes. "I don't know," Sarah whispered. "Maybe I'm just really tired of being right." He slowly tilted his head, touching his lips to her neck. Sarah flinched, instinctively bracing herself, trying to pull away. But her resistance was too weak, and she couldn't push him away. "Let's find a quieter place," he whispered, his lips lightly touching her ear. Sarah's head was full of doubt. But, as happens in such situations, some self-justification mechanism was already working inside. "It's just one night. It's just a game. I won't cross the line." Still, when Adam took her hand and led her back into the interior of the mansion, she didn't stop. They walked through corridors, passing guest bedrooms, elegantly furnished lounge nooks. The music and voices continued in the distance. But for some reason, Sarah's footsteps were heading toward where it was quieter, darker. At one point, she stopped, as if about to say they shouldn't do this, but Adam gently ran his hand down her cheek and covered her mouth with a kiss. This kiss was desperate, demanding, and yet exciting at the same time. Sarah felt a rush of adrenaline, as if she were standing on the edge of a precipice and about to take a leap. They disappeared into one of the guest rooms, the door closing with a soft click. Outside the window, there were still echoes of the party, but here, in the semi-darkness, it was just the two of them. Adam pressed Sarah against the wall, and she felt her whole being respond to his touch. It was too abrupt, too sudden for a woman who until that day had lived within the confines of correctness. But at the same time, it was what she'd secretly fantasized about: the loss of control, the storm of emotions she'd sorely missed. His hands slid around her waist, pulling her against him, his lips insistently finding her lips, her neck, her collarbones. She could feel his heartbeat, and her own, ready to burst out of her chest. Somewhere in the back of her mind the thought pounded, "What am I doing? This is cheating." But the wine, his embrace, the throbbing desire overpowered everything. It was as if she was transcending all boundaries. Sarah didn't remember how she found herself without her jacket or how his hand unbuttoned her dress down her back. They merged in a kiss that carried on a wave of passion. At that moment, no reality existed outside the door. There was only whispers, sighs, the rustling of fabric, the vibrating shiver inside. They pulled away from each other only for a moment to catch their breath, then sank back into the embrace. It was like madness, too abrupt, dangerous, and yet delightful at the same time. With each passing second, Sarah sank deeper, losing her ability to think. She knew she had crossed that very line. Anything beyond that was outright treason, even if you could justify it as a momentary weakness. Somewhere in the hallways, there was laughter. Downstairs, someone was loudly calling for fireworks, but the room was dark and quiet except for their ragged breathing. Adam was skillfully playing the game, and Sarah was responding, sinking into an abyss of sensation she hadn't had in years. Or perhaps never. When it was over, she lay beside him on the wide couch, listening to her heart pounding. Finally, reality burst into consciousness, and the realization came. There was no going back. She stared up at the ceiling, trying to imagine through the remnants of passion what she would say to her husband, Jason, when she looked into his eyes. But the image of her husband was too distant for now. There was only Adam now, pulling her to him, whispering something about their coincidence, their passion, that this was just the beginning. Sarah didn't respond. She felt as if she had taken a leap into the abyss without a parachute. It was exciting in its own way, but terrifying at the same time. After a while, they returned to the party, though no one noticed their absence. People were already a little tipsy, and some of the guests were moving outside to watch the fireworks. Sarah hurriedly left under the pretense that she wasn't feeling well. Adam didn't hold her back, only kissed her cheek goodbye, to which she responded with a weak smile. It wasn't even dawn when Sarah's car pulled up in front of their house. The whole time she drove, she tried to calm down, replaying the last few hours in her head. How had this even happened? Her whole life had been built on honesty, on trusting her husband, on believing that cheating was something incompatible with her moral principles. And then, one night, in the same mansion, everything turned upside down. Jason was already asleep in their marital bedroom. Or maybe he'd even realized long ago that she wasn't around, but for some reason he hadn't called or written. Sarah decided it was for the best. She didn't need to answer questions or lie right now. She took off her shoes and, trying not to make any noise, went into the bathroom. She started the shower and the cold water rushed over her body, mixing feelings of shame, guilt, and the still smoldering memory of passion. She desperately wanted to wash away the night, as if it could disappear from reality if she just scrubbed her skin thoroughly. But the memories wouldn't go away. When she finally lay down next to her husband, he mumbled something in his sleep without waking up. Sarah felt her heart clench. She touched his hand. It was warm and calm. She had once believed that hand, to be her sure protection. But now she'd ruined it herself. It was close to 6 in the morning when she fell asleep. The smell of coffee woke her in the morning. Jason must have gotten up and decided to have breakfast before he went on with his projects. Sarah got up and looked at herself in the mirror. Her eyes were red. Her face paled despite the foundation she had machine applied to give herself at least a little bit of a decent look. "Pull it together," she told herself. In the kitchen, Jason sat with his phone, a cup of coffee, smoking on the table. He looked up, but didn't smile, just gave her a brief nod to a nearby chair. "Ah," he said. "How was corporate?" Sarah tried to speak in a neutral tone, answering something about there were a lot of people, I was tired so I got back late. She didn't look him in the eye, hoping he wouldn't sense any falseness. Jason continued to leaf through something on his phone, and suddenly his face darkened. He slowly turned the screen towards Sarah. She saw footage of the party, people dancing, laughing, partying in full swing, and there she was in the foreground pressed against Adam. The movements are too passionate to be called a simple dance. Someone from the colleagues, apparently, decided to film the hot moments for the general corporate chat, and now the whole office is discussing the video. "Sarah, what is it?" her husband asked quietly. Sarah felt goosebumps run down her spine. She didn't know what to say. Her hands trembled, and she reached for her coffee cup, but almost dropped it. Jason continued to stare at her with a look of hurt and anger. It's just stupid. I had a drink and there was a dance. But nothing happened," she blurted out, trying to sound confident. "I can't stop a man from dancing with me." But it sounded pathetic and unconvincing, especially considering how close they'd been in the video. Jason was silent for a while, then repeated with a push. "Nothing happened?" Jason interjected. Sarah averted her eyes. She felt like she was going to die of guilt, but she decided, if I confess, it's over. Now I have to lie, say it was just a dance. And she, gathering all her strength, began to tell the version that the corporate party was long. Someone persuaded her to dance. She just lit up to the music because everyone was having fun. Yes, it may have come out a little too candid on camera, but that didn't mean she was having an affair. Jason looked at her with a long, hard stare. Then he nodded coldly, without saying a word, and got up from the table. "I'm going to the office," he said. "We shall have more to talk about." He left, and it was only as the front door closed that Sarah realized she was alone. A wave of panic rose inside her. She had the feeling that her husband didn't believe her for a second, and yet she couldn't get rid of the burning thought. The video is just a dance. What if something else comes out? She picked up her phone and noticed dozens of messages in the work chats, most about the party, but some with joking comments about Sarah and the new investor's searing dance. Everything blurred in her eyes, and she began to realize that the consequences could be far more serious than she'd thought. The whole day passed in suspense. Sarah tried to work, but kept catching herself thinking, what if Jason found out something? What if someone saw us in that room? She scrutinized social media, the general corporate chat room. No one seemed to have posted anything yet besides that unfortunate video of the dance. But she sensed that keeping a secret would be difficult. Jason returned late that evening, silently taking off his jacket, and Sarah could see from his look that he was still angry and tense. The atmosphere in the house had become almost unbearable. She tried to start a conversation, asking him how his day had been, but he only said one word. The dinner remained untouched because half an hour later the doorbell rang. "Are you expecting someone?" Jason asked, frowning. "No," Sarah answered, confused. She went to the door, and when she opened it, she was shocked to see Adam standing on the doorstep. He wore the same confident look and relaxed smile, but he looked a little more formal. Classic slacks, well-fitting jacket, white shirt. "Good evening," he said. "I hope it's not too late for a visit. I want to discuss some work things we didn't have time to talk about at the corporate party." Sarah's heart nearly jumped out of her chest. She was literally stunned, not knowing what to say. But Jason's voice came from behind her. "Come on in," he said with cold politeness. "I'd like to ask you a few questions, too." Adam came in, looked around, and sat on the living room couch, as if he were a frequent visitor. Sarah was afraid to even look her husband in the eye, realizing how ridiculous the situation looked. This is it, the reveal, she thought. "So, Jason leaned back against the arm of the chair, crossing his arms over his chest. What did you want to talk about? Adam, without a shadow of embarrassment, began to say something about the company's development plans and investment strategies. It seemed to Sarah that he was deliberately prolonging this business talk, occasionally casting her a meaningful glance. Finally, after a pause, Jason asked, "Tell me, Adam, you were at the corporate party, weren't you?" "Of course I was," he nodded. "I'm an investor, so I had to meet some of the key employees. And if I understand correctly, you had time to meet my wife." Sarah felt everything inside her clench. Adam smiled as if nothing had happened. "Yes, we chatted at the party, no surprise there." Sarah is a very promising manager. There was tension in the air. Jason rose slowly, glanced at Sarah, and said, "I'm going to step back for a minute and get myself some water. Maybe someone else would like some, too." Adam politely declined, and Jason left for the kitchen. Left alone with Sarah, Adam finally raised an eyebrow and whispered, "How are you, beautiful? No regrets about that night?" Sarah opened her mouth but couldn't get a sound out. She was shaking with fear. She wanted to ask him to shut up, to disappear, to do anything to keep Jason from hearing those words. But Adam, leaning toward her, added, "You were great. I can't forget about you. I hope you don't regret the choice you made." At that moment, there was a soft creaking sound outside the door. Sarah turned her head and saw Jason standing in the doorway. He was looking at them, and there was a mixture of rage and pain in his eyes. There was a plastic water bottle lying on the floor at his feet, which he had obviously dropped when he heard Adam's words. Adam didn't immediately notice his presence, but when he caught Sarah's gaze, he turned around. A sepulchral silence ensued. Jason entered the room slowly, as if trying to maintain a modicum of self-control. His face went white, his lips pressed into a thin line. Sarah felt herself growing short of breath. "Did you sleep with him?" he asked, looking directly at her. His voice sounded quiet, but there was rage simmering in it. Sarah tried to say something, but the words stuck in her throat. She glanced at Adam, hoping he'd give her some support for the "we were just talking" version, but he just stared at her with cold calm. "Jason, it's—" Sarah started to say, but didn't have time to finish. Jason suddenly threw away the chair that was next to him and lunged at Adam, screaming, "Bastard!" The blow, so fast that Adam didn't have time to dodge it, hit him in the jaw. He fell back against the wall, but quickly recovered and tried to fight back. The two men fought furiously, exchanging blows, the living room rattling with overturned furniture. Sarah screamed and ran up to try to break them up, but was pushed away. She almost fell on her heart, tangled in the leg of an overturned table. Jason was acting on adrenaline. The rage and betrayal gave him strength. Adam, despite his more athletic build, was unprepared for such fury. Finally, after receiving several heavy blows, he collapsed to the floor, smashing his lip and grimacing at the pain in his side. "Get out of my house, you bastard!" Jason exhaled. "Run!" Adam, panting, struggled to get up and ran out. Before he left, he glanced at Sarah for a moment with a look of disappointed regret or evil mockery and slammed the door. Sarah was left alone with her husband, who was breathing heavily, clenching his hands into fists. He turned to her, and there was such a depth of pain in his eyes that she felt her heart skip a beat. "Why?" he asked, and in that question you could hear not only "why did you cheat," but "why did you ruin everything we had?" Sarah burst into tears, trying to move toward him, but he pulled away. "Don't come near me," he said in a broken voice. I need to leave." He went quickly to the bedroom, and she stayed in the living room, looking at the mess, the overturned couch, the broken vase, the shards of glass on the floor. Soon there was the sound of a closet opening from the bedroom, and she realized he was packing. Sarah couldn't find the words, for any argument seemed ridiculous. In a matter of minutes her life had fallen apart. Jason walked out of the room with his bag on his shoulder. He no longer looked at her. "Jason, wait, please," she begged, but he remained silent. He walked to the front door, opened it, and, turning around on the threshold, said in a barely audible voice, "I'm filing for divorce tomorrow, and you whore do whatever you want. I hope it was worth it." And he walked out, leaving Sarah alone with the all-consuming silence. She sank to her knees, feeling everything inside turn over with guilt and horror. The world she had built for so long was gone in an instant. A week after that night, almost nothing had changed outwardly at Sarah's house, except for Jason's absence. He didn't return her calls, dryly messaged her a couple times to get her divorce papers ready, and disappeared from her life. Sarah wandered through the rooms, looking at pictures of them, still happy. She realized that much of her own fault for giving in to a moment of weakness and fatal passion. It wasn't easy at work either. Rumors of her dancing with Adam had spread through the company, but no one knew what happened next. Everyone had only seen the video, and it was already starting to become long-standing gossip. Adam only showed up at the office a couple times, discussing investments. He didn't try to re-establish contact with Sarah, and one day, she herself saw him in the lobby with the spectacular blonde he'd introduced to everyone as his escort. At that moment, it finally came to Sarah's attention that he had never pursued anything serious. For him, it was just a wave of passion, a little adventure, an exciting game where he was used to winning. One evening, she was sitting on the couch in the empty living room, which still bore the marks of the fight. A few scratches on the wall, a table that had never been fixed. She was holding a picture in her hands, a wedding photo of her, and Jason laughing, looking at each other. How could she have ruined everything so easily? Thoughts of the missed chance, of the betrayal that had brought nothing but pain and loneliness, were eating her up inside. She couldn't even say goodbye to her husband. He had moved in with a friend, filed for divorce, and now the cold officialism of court papers reigned between them. Sarah tried to keep her cool at work, but more and more often she noticed that people looked at her strangely, as if they were discussing her behind her back. Perhaps it was her own paranoia, but it left a residue in the minds of her colleagues. No one dared to talk to her directly, though. One day, she received a call from Marie, a friend from work, who asked her timidly, "How are you? Why don't we talk?" But Sarah was ashamed, even in front of her friend. She didn't know how to justify her stupidity for jeopardizing not only her personal life, but her reputation in the company. Weeks passed. The divorce proceedings went quickly, without delay. Jason had no claim to her assets, but he wasn't going to reconcile either. When he came to pick up the rest of her things, he didn't say a word, just asked her to sign some papers. His eyes were cold, and she knew it was unlikely he would ever forgive her. Sarah often thought, what if I had stopped then on the terrace? What if I had been stronger and said no when he took me to that room? But the past could no longer be rewritten. Soon she was finally alone in their house, full of the ghosts of her former love. Even if she wanted to call someone to visit, she realized that her soul was not ready for companionship. In the evenings, sitting in the kitchen, she caught herself staring at the door, waiting for Jason to come in. But he never did. As for Adam, he was completely uninterested in continuing contact with her. As she'd learned, he'd signed an investment contract with management and now had more reason to be in the office at all, yet he'd never once approached her. Office meetings were all about business, and one of the senior managers was in charge of interacting with him. Sarah tried to avoid his gaze, and thankfully was never alone with him. Another month passed after that ill-fated evening. One day, Sarah needed to sort through the closet where Jason kept his shirts. She came across a small envelope containing tickets for a Caribbean cruise, the same gift Jason had planned to give her for their wedding anniversary. The tickets had dates that had already passed. Sarah crouched on the floor, clutching the envelope to her chest, and burst into tears. Turns out he was preparing a surprise, wanting to bring into their lives the very spark she was looking for in the arms of another. The months that followed were a time of reassessment for her. She decided to change her job after all, explaining to her superiors that she wanted a fresh start and couldn't be in a place where she was constantly reminded of that unfortunate corporate party. The management went along with her and helped her with recommendations. They valued her professionalism, and no one wanted a public scandal. She rented an apartment closer to the city center, putting the house on the market. Not because she couldn't live there, but because every corner reminded her of Jason and the stupid things she'd done. She needed to get away from the ghosts of the past. Sometimes she still missed the feeling she'd had with Adam. It had been a hellish mixture of fear, excitement, and passion. But looking back, she realized that playing with fire always carried consequences. and often too painful to justify the fleeting pleasure. Sometime later, Sarah accidentally saw a photo of Adam with another woman on one of the internet pages. Apparently, he continued his former lifestyle, constantly changing girlfriends. It wasn't jealousy that pricked her heart, but shame and regret. She wished she could turn back the clock, but fate had its own rules. After all, life goes on. The divorce was final, and she realized there was no turning back her relationship with Jason. He might even find another woman, one who would appreciate his reliability and be faithful to him. And she had to learn to live with the idea that one rash move could change her life for the worse, destroying everything they'd worked so hard for over the years. Sarah didn't know what awaited her next, but she knew one thing for sure. She would never make the same mistake again. The bitterness of loss and betrayal was forever embedded in her mind. Sometimes she still woke up at night in a cold sweat, remembering the scenes from that party, how step by step she'd overstepped her bounds. But as the minutes passed, the realization came that now she had the chance to start over, albeit alone. She looked in the mirror, and it was no longer the same old Sarah, but a woman who had learned what it was to live with the weight of irreparable guilt. But perhaps this was the first step to growing up and a new life that she would build more consciously. Because some games with fire really do end up with you burning to the ground. And sometimes you can get out of those ashes, albeit with burns on your heart. And that's where today's story ends. Thank you for watching to the end. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like and comment. We'd love to discuss this story with you. See you in the next video.